I don't know what's exactly going on, but somehow we got the ball rolling this morning. Tonight. I got 50 minutes left in the hour, so y'all settle in. No, I don't think I'm going to use up all that time, but we got going, and I'm going to continue us in that. If you want to turn to Isaiah chapter 51, just want to look at this one chapter with you tonight. It's just this one chapter. It's a chapter that we sometimes ignore because of the messianic prophecy all around it. There's a lot of messianic prophecy in chapter 50. There's a whole bunch in 52 on. But there's really not a huge messianic prophecy here in 51, so it gets overlooked. I've been reading it, and I called Mr. Terry and asked him to come and study it with me. We got together and we analyzed it, and this sermon here is kind of the fruit of that study, of trying to study just this chapter. And that's what I want to share with you tonight. So if you stay engaged with me, I think you'll get a lot out of this one chapter. What he starts with at the end of chapter 50, he explains a problem. And I imagine many of us have either experienced this problem or know people that are currently in this problem. And it really is a sin problem. Romans 10:3 talks about it. Paul says, "For they being ignorant of God's righteousness and seeking to establish their own righteousness have not submitted to the righteousness of God." So that people, they're ignorant of God's righteousness, so instead they just create their own standard of righteousness, and that's what they try to live off of. And it doesn't work. It doesn't work very well because your standards will never meet God's standards. Now, if you look in chapter 50 at the end, he basically explains the same thing but using a metaphor. Chapter 50, verse 10, "Who among you fears the Lord? Who obeys the voice of his servant? Who walks in darkness and has no light? Let him trust in the name of the Lord and rely upon his God. Look, all of you who kindle a fire, who encircle yourselves with sparks, walk in the light of your fire, and in the sparks you have kindled. This you shall have from my hand. You shall lie down in torment." And this is God's people. We know we're supposed to be walking in the light. But what he's describing here is people that instead of relying on God, instead of relying on God's fire for light, they just walk in darkness. And what they've settled with is their own fire. And their own fire isn't good enough. Look at it says in verse 11, "You encircle yourself with sparks." You're just sparking. You have little bits of flashing moments of light. That's not the way to be living or walking spiritually. And you can imagine being in your room and you're trying to look for things in your room. Is it easier just to turn on the lights? I got the light on. I can see, okay, here's my bed, here's my cabinet, here's what I'm looking for, it's on top of my cabinet. Or is it easier just to keep on flashing the light on and off and trying to find your way? None of us would do that. None of us would do that in a physical sense, but spiritually, that's what we do. We have these little sparks, and we're relying on our own fire instead of God's, and it's not bright enough, and you're not seeing your way. And you see this in Christians when they're being inconsistent. You know this is what they're doing when their spirituality is inconsistent. Okay, it's great that I act a certain way when I'm here Sunday morning. It's another way when I act when I'm at home. Oh, I act a certain way when I'm at home with my spouse, but when I'm work, no way. I turn the light off. And what they're doing is they're sparking. This is saying this to the Sunday night crowd. But what about people that aren't here right now? They were here this morning, but they're not here tonight. What are they doing? It's inconsistent. And I believe what it is they're relying on their own fire. I know there's people that are sick or maybe out of town or something like that. But when you have people that decide not to come every time we assemble together, it's because they are relying on their own fire. And it doesn't get you anywhere. It only gets you halfway. And halfway isn't good enough for the Lord. And that's the problem even here back in Isaiah. Now, of course, I said that to the Sunday night crowd. I like to try to work that into the AM so we all get to hear it. But that is the problem with this sparking. It doesn't work. It's so inconsistent. Now, what's the solution he gives in verse 11? In verse 10, "Let him trust in the name of the Lord. Let him rely upon his God." When people rely on their own fire, when they just spark and they're inconsistent, the problem is actually a trust problem. The problem is they don't really trust God enough to rely on his fire, so they try to make use of their own. And this is what Isaiah 51 is all about. Isaiah 51 is all about this trust problem and how you can develop a trust with God. If you have this trust, you rely on his fire, and his fire is eternal. It doesn't spark. It's consistent because he is the light of the world. He's an eternal light source. So we're going to look at Isaiah 51. So you won't be overwhelmed and you can be encouraged to engage in this. Here's my outline. It's very, very simple in Isaiah 51. So we're basically going to go over the whole chapter and we're going to read it and a little bit into chapter 52. The first three statements he's going to make, and that's going to be my first 3 points, is listen to me. So he's going to say, listen to me, listen to me, listen to me. Then the next three, and it's going to be the second half of this, is going to be awake, awake. And he's going to say, awake, 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 awake. And we're going to cover that last awake, awake a little bit into 52, and then I'll be done. So to be engaged, you can be with me. Don't rely on your own fire here. Rely on God's fire, and stay with me as we go through this together. So chapter 51, the first, listen to me. Now what's great about this is God talking. This is his dialogue. This isn't just Isaiah relaying the message. It's actually God talking, and you have the little quotation marks here. So God here is talking about me. He's talking about God, me. Chapter 51, verse 1. Listen to me, you who follow after righteousness, you who seek the Lord. Look to the rock from which you were hewn, and to the hole of the pit from which you were dug. Look to Abraham your father, and to Sarah who bore you. For I called him alone, and blessed him, and increased him. For the Lord will comfort Zion. He will comfort all of her waste places. He will make her wilderness like Eden, and her desert like the garden of the Lord. Joy and gladness will be found in it, thanksgiving and the voice of melody. So listen to me, you who follow after righteousness. And what I want you to do is I want you to look to the rock. And the rock here in the pit of which they came from is not exactly Christ. We usually talk rock, we talk about going straight to Christ. But here, I actually believe he's talking about Abraham and Sarah. Look to the place where you came from. Look to your forefathers. Look at their faith. Abraham and Sarah were practically the blueprint for faith. God tells Abraham to go to a land he's never been before. Abraham has enough faith to go. Sarah's told, even though she's well beyond the years, that she's going to have a child. Sarah has a child. They are the blueprint of faith. And some of your versions may look at this and say, I took you from the same quarry. So it's the sense of that God is telling you, you look at Abraham, you look at Sarah, you look at their amazing faith that they had, you're made out of the same exact stuff. You are made out of the same exact stuff I made Abraham and Sarah out of. You can have the same type of righteousness. You can have the same type of faith. We can have the same type of relationship. Now, as Gentiles, we're not blood related to Abraham and Sarah. We didn't come from them, but we were adopted into them. And if you think of a way of a human physical sense, we were made physically and even spiritually, being made in the image of God, just like Abraham and Sarah were made. Can we be like Abraham and Sarah? Can we have their faith? Absolutely, we can have their faith. We can be just like them in that regard. We get scared, right? You say, I'm just so weak. Andrew, I'm barely holding on. Lord, I'm barely holding on. I don't know if I can say like this. You are made out of the same stuff Abraham and Sarah was. You can be like that. You can be a champion, a legend of faith like these two were. Now, he says at the middle of verse 2, for I called him alone. And this makes sense because God's speaking to a remnant here. Did it matter that Abraham and Sarah were alone? Did that matter in God's promise? No, it did not matter. It didn't matter who they were. It didn't matter who was around them, who was with them. All that mattered is that God had picked them, he had chosen them, and even though we're alone, he still was able to bless him. So you feel isolated. Andrew, I'm weak, I'm isolated, I'm all by myself. None of those things matter to God. None of them do. He can still bless you and he can still increase you if you have the faith like Abraham and Sarah did. Verse 3 talks about comforting Zion. He will make her wilderness like Eden. He will make her desert like the garden of the Lord, and joy and gladness will be in it. Thanksgiving and the voice of melody. We were studying this, and what we eventually went to was we were thinking about Acts chapter 2. You think about someone's soul being empty, their soul being like a desert, like the wilderness, and then God takes it, and he's able to turn that wilderness or that desert into something like the Garden of Eden. And then there's joy and this gladness there in someone's heart. In Acts 2, that's what happened, right? Peter gives the sermon. He charges them with they were the ones that killed Jesus. They're cut to the heart. But then what does God do with them next? That's when the joy and gladness comes in through their own redemption. And you go into the next verse, and it says, they have shared all things in common. They abide in the apostles' doctrine and thanksgiving and the fellowship and the breaking of bread. And all these wonderful things are happening. Why? Because God took their desert, God took their wilderness, and he turned it into a paradise in their hearts. That's what God does. That's what our God can do. It doesn't matter if you're lonely. It doesn't matter if you're isolated. It doesn't matter if your heart's broken. He can do something with you. And this is his promise here in the first 3 verses. That's the first, listen to me. Listen to me, I can do something with you like I did something with Abraham and Sarah. Second, listen to me. Verse 4. Listen to me, my people, and give ear to me, O my nation. For law will proceed from me, and I will make my justice rest as a light of the peoples. My righteousness is near, my salvation has gone forth, and my arms will judge the peoples. The coastlands will wait upon me, and on my arm they will trust. Lift up your eyes to the heavens and look to the earth beneath, for the heavens will vanish away like smoke, the earth will grow old like a garment, and those who dwell in it will die in like manner. But my salvation will be forever, and my righteousness will not be abolished. So number 1, in verse 4 and verse 5, he's basically saying that my justice is coming. My justice is close. And what he says here is that my justice is actually a light of the peoples. It provides light to the people. What were we talking about at the very beginning? We're talking about turning that light on, right? Relying on God's light from his fire instead of our own. God's justice, his law, is a light to his people. And it is a permanent light. It's able to see your way. And now when you can see, you know that verse 5, that his righteousness is near. You know that his salvation has gone forth from him. Now that I've got the light on, it's a permanent light source. Because he's delivering justice, I see that his righteousness is close to me. I can obtain it. I see that his salvation has gone forth him to me. I can attain it because I have the light on. But then he says, my arms will judge the peoples. And it's going to begin using this phrase talking about the arm of the Lord, what it can do. He is going to judge the peoples. Now, does it say he's going to judge just the Israelites, peoples? No, it just says he's going to judge all the peoples. And this is what it is. And you see this through God. He will bring judgment on one group of people, but then will in turn and then bring judgment on the group of people that brought his judgment on the other people. You see this in Nebuchadnezzar, right? Nebuchadnezzar, he comes in, he brings judgment on God's people, and after that, what does God do to Nebuchadnezzar? His arm brings judgment on Nebuchadnezzar because his arm brings justice to all people, no matter who they are. So, the conclusion at the end of verse 5 is, on my arm they will trust. I trust in God's arm. I don't trust in all these other things. I trust in God's arm. So now he's going to give us examples of other things we can put our trust in that is not his arm. So the first thing we have here in this, listen to me, he says, look to the sky. Look to the heavens. What do you see there? And you see that in verse 6. He says, look to the earth beneath. Look there. What do you see? The earth will grow old like a garment, and those who dwell in it will die in like manner. That's what you see. That is growing old like a wool garment. What I picture is if I was this and I would want to write this, I'd say, look to the sky. You see everything's falling apart. Look to the earth. You see everything's falling apart. Look to the dryer. You're still pulling lint out of it, aren't you? That's your clothes. I feel like that is the best example to show that everything is deteriorating. Everything is. Everything's falling apart, and everything has been falling apart since Adam and Eve got kicked out of the garden. Everything has. It's getting eaten up like a garment, and those who dwell in it, they'll die in a like manner. They will be eaten up like a garment. But what is the opposite of this? The end of verse 6. But my salvation will be forever. My righteousness will not be abolished. That garment, that heaven, that earth, the dryer, all those things are going to fall apart, but my salvation, my righteousness will be forever. That's what you can trust in. That's something that we need to listen to. Stay with me here. Third, listen to me. Listen to me, 51, 7 through 8. Listen to me, you who know righteousness, you people in whose heart is my law. Do not fear the reproach of men, nor be afraid of their insults, for a moth will eat them up like a garment, and the worm will eat them like wool. But my righteousness will be forever, and my salvation from generation to generation. So you have no need to fear the reproach of men. Don't be afraid of their insults, because they're going to pass away too. They're not forever. But what's the opposite? He says it at the end again. It's the same thing. But my salvation is from generation to generation. My righteousness is forever. So again, it's the same conclusion here. Me, I'm eternal. So you listen to me. Now we're going to cover this later in the next half of the chapter, so I'm going to move on. The next point that he's going to make after these listen to me's is the awake. Now if you look here in verse 9 is when the awake start. God isn't speaking anymore. God's done at that last point. My salvation is from generation to generation, and God stops speaking. As what it seems like is Isaiah begins to say, awake, awake. Let's just read the first verse, verse 9 there. Verse 9, awake, awake, put on strength, O arm of the Lord. Awake as in the Ancient of Days, in the generations of old. Are you not the arm that cut Rahab apart and wounded the serpent? So awake, awake. So this is Isaiah talking now. Who is he telling to wake up? He's actually telling God to wake up, to awake, awake. The first time I studied this, I read this. In the sense of I was making in my mind, Isaiah told God to wake up. Are you kidding me? You don't tell God to wake awake. God's already awake. But the more you read this, and I'm about to show, what he's doing is he's not being disrespectful. He's not telling God to wake up. God has always been awake. What he's asking is he's making an appeal. God, remember how you used to be? And all these stories that I've run about hearing about? I want you to be like that for me. So what this is a prayer or an appeal to God. God, awake, awake. Put on that strength that I used to see that all the time that I know stories about that you used to do. Let's continue reading. Verse 10. Are you not the one who dried up the sea, the waters of the great deep, that made the depths of the sea a road for the redeemed to cross over? So the ransomed of the Lord shall return and come to Zion with singing. With everlasting joy on their heads, they shall obtain joy and gladness. Sorrow and sighing shall flee away. So we go through the different things that God has done when he put on strength. Lord, do that again for me. It says at the end of verse 9 that, are you not the arm that cut Rahab apart? What is he talking about there? He is not talking about the Rahab, the person. That's what he can't be talking about. That. It doesn't even fit in this order of the story. What he's talking about is Egypt. And you see in other places that he will use Rahab as a comparison with Egypt. So you're the arm that tore Egypt apart, being that Rahab was formerly a prostitute. Imagine what it is that Egypt is this fornicator. Egypt has all these idols. They're so big into all these false gods, and they're fornicating with God, against God by being with all these idols. So that's why they're called Rahab. But he says, God, you are the one that tore Rahab apart. You tore Egypt apart. You wounded the serpent. And picture that serpent wrapping around Israel, enslaving the Israelites. What did he do? He wounded that serpent. He destroyed that monster to let the Israelites go. And then we go into the next scene. You are the one who dried up the sea. You are the one that created a road to allow the redeemed to cross over. You did all these things, all these incredible things. And again, the ask is, Lord, I want to be like that. I want to be like Moses. I want to go across the Red Sea like that. I want to be redeemed. I saw these amazing, incredible things you did to your people. I want you to do that now for me. And it's this appeal. I want to be like that. I want to be like these incredible stories I grew up hearing. I want to have that type of relationship you had with Moses and you had with the prophets. Because, Lord, you are incredible and your arm can do all these things. Let me ask the question, can God do these things we just read for us today? Spiritually, he does it to us for us all the time. When you see someone decides that they want to be a Christian and they want to go down that road that God has created, don't all these things happen? Does he not cut the idolatry apart? Does he not wound the serpent? Does he not redeem his people through water? He does all these things still. And what all these things were shadows of what is to come now. He still is awake. He is wide awake, and he is still doing these things for his people. We can take great encouragement with that. And then he goes on that you come to Zion with singing with everlasting joy on their heads. Sorrow and sighing shall flee away, because while we're in Zion. The problem with being an Israelite, and Mr. Terry went over a lot of this morning, was that you didn't always own Zion. Zion was your special place. It was the place of spiritual growth. It was the place of where the temple was, is where you could be with God. But if you're an Israelite, y'all didn't always have Zion. When Assyria took over, Assyria owned Zion. When this state takes over, that place owned Zion. You weren't always able to get to Zion. But now that we have a heavenly Jerusalem, now that we have a heavenly Zion, we as God's people can always go to Zion. We can go whenever we want to, because no man can take it from us anymore. And we can always have singing. We can always have everlasting joy on our heads. We can always obtain joy and gladness, because Zion is not far from you. It's not. And that's what's so great about having a heavenly Jerusalem instead of a physical one. Moving on to this point, if we start in verse 12, I want to read 12 through 16. This is the longest section of the Awake Awakes. We have a second half here. Verse 12, this is God's reply to Isaiah's appeal. Verse 12, I am he who comforts you. Who are you that you should be afraid? Of a man who will die, and the Son of Man who will be made like grass? And forget the Lord your Maker, who stretched out the heavens and laid the foundations of the earth. You have feared continually every day because of the fury of the oppressor, when he has prepared to destroy. And where is the fury of your oppressor? And it's almost really funny here because he gets sarcastic. He's making the statement, he said, who are you to be afraid? I am he. I am your comforter. So who are you to be afraid? I'm here with you. And he makes this statement at the end of verse 13. You have feared every day. You are afraid every day of this opponent. You're afraid every day because of the fury of the oppressor, when he is prepared to destroy. And then he flips it. Where is the fury of the oppressor? Where is it? I'm here. I'm here to fight the battle. Where is he? And what it is when David went and fought Goliath, I can tell you right now, when God was there, Goliath shrunk. He wasn't a giant anymore. When God's next to you, there's no more giants anymore. And you have some big opponent, whatever it may be. And you can do whatever you need to. Some kind of spiritual problem you're dealing with, some kind of ailment, something you're just having to deal with right now, and you think it's such a big problem. It has the fury of the oppressor, something that you worry about, you're fearful about every day. But when God's there, he says, where is it? Where is this fury that you're so worried about? That doesn't exist anymore when God's in the picture. And this is the point that he makes here. Continuing on, and I love this next part. Verse 14, the captive exile hastens that he might be loosed, that he should not die in the pit, and that his bread should not fail. But I am the Lord your God, who divided the sea, waves roared. The Lord of hosts is his name, and I have put my words in your mouth. I have covered you with the shadow of my hand, that I may plant the heavens, lay the foundations of the earth, and say to Zion, you are my people. What God does here, and when you think about all the stuff that we've been going through lately, we worry about society and we worry about other Christians in other parts of the world. And of course, we know about the shooting, and we've been told that he was targeting Christians and all those things. And then you read something like this passage this week when all that's going on. But you see God use his strengths. He says, but I am the Lord. I am the one who divided the seas. The Lord of the hosts is his name. I have covered you with the shadow of my hand. I have laid the foundations of the earth. And he does all of this just to say, you are my people. He did all of that just to say to Zion, you are my people. That is why he's the God of all comfort. That we worry about the fury of others, but God has already declared, after doing all these incredible things, that we are his people. And when you have that assurance, that one little phrase, it makes all the difference. Because he's in the picture now. And that's what I get in this passage right here. And that's what it said. I love this one the best, that you are my people. Here's the second awake. Verse 17, awake, awake, stand up, O Jerusalem. You have drunk the hand of the Lord, the cup of his fury, and you have drunk the dregs of the cup of trembling, and drained it out. There is no one to guide among the sons she has brought forth, nor is there any who takes her by the hand among all the sons she has brought up. The two things have come to you. You will be sorry for you, desolation and destruction, famine and sword. But whom will I comfort you? Your sons have fainted. They lie on the head of the streets. Like an antelope in a net, they are full of the fury of the Lord, the rebuke of your God. So you kind of see the opposite side of the Lord here when he has to rebuke a people. That they have taken, basically what it is sin. They've taken sin, they have this cup, it's the fury of God, and they keep on drinking it. And they're choosing to drink it. They can put it down, but they've chosen to drink this. And it's getting worse, and it's getting worse. Your sons have fainted. There's no one here to guide you, to tell you any different now. What am I supposed to do with you? Yet they continue to drink the fury of the Lord. Verse 21 now is the plea. This is God pleading to them to let go of the cup. Therefore, please hear this, you afflicted. I think that's just incredible right there. But you have such a powerful chapter, such a powerful passage, and he's making all these really big points. But here, verse 21, at least in my version, it says please. It is almost like a totally different tone of voice here. Therefore, please hear this, you afflicted, and drunk with not wine. And that just means they're drunk on the Lord's fury. It's not the type of drunk with wine like that. Verse 22, thus says your Lord, the Lord and your God, who pleads the cause of his people. See, I have taken out of your hand the cup of trembling, the dregs of my cup of my fury. You shall no longer drink it. But I will put it in the hand of those who afflict you, who have said to you, lie down that we may walk over you. And you have laid your body like the ground and as the street for those who walk over you. What this is God begging you to take that cup out of your hand. That cup of fury. What it is if you're in the situation, you're using on your own fire, you have your own standards of righteousness, what all that's going to do is bring God's fury upon you. And you got God saying, I am going to bring that fury upon you. I'm going to rebuke you, but I want you to let me take that cup back. And he's begging them. He says, please listen to me. I want to take that cup. I want to take that cup away from you. You're not going to tremble anymore because I've taken the cup away. That cup of fury. Now, what is he going to do with it? He says, I'm going to put it in the hands of those who afflict you. I'm going to put it in the hands of those who try to walk all over you. Even when God's people were being rebuked, even when he did allow another people to walk all over him, you can still see the compassion that he has for his people in even those situations. God does not like his people to be walked all over. God was not happy when Assyria walked all over the people. I don't believe when you read about Jesus talking and warning them about the destruction of Jerusalem, how Rome's going to come soon. He keeps on telling y'all need to get out of here, and he weeps for Jerusalem. You do not see a God that is happy about somebody getting walked all over. He's never happy about it. And what he desires is he desires true hearts that are contrite, that wants to repent and wants to give the cup back. That's what he wants. If you're drinking the cup of fury, give it back to him. He wants to take it from you. 52. This is the last awake, awake. Chapter 52, awake, awake. Put on strength, O Zion. Put on your beautiful garments. O Jerusalem, the holy city. For the uncircumcised and the unclean shall no longer come to you. Shake yourself from the dust, arise. Sit down, O Jerusalem. Loose yourself from the bonds of your neck, O captive daughter of Zion. For thus says the Lord, you have sold yourselves for nothing, and you shall be redeemed without money. He tells them here at the end, I've taken the cup, I've given it to your enemies, now put on strength. Shake the dust off of you, get up. I know it's funny. When I first read this, if you notice, he says, stand up. And it's going to be the idea of shake the dust off of you, arise. And the next phrase is sit down. And at first I thought that was kind of funny, but now I just understand what it really is saying. He's saying, stand up, get the dust off of you, and then sit down so you can get the shackles off your feet. Get the shackles off your arms. Loosen yourself so you're free. So stand up, get the dust off of you, take these things that are off of you that are imprisoning you in, because you have sold yourself for nothing, and you shall be redeemed without money. And this is when he starts back into the messianic prophecies. That you have sold yourself for nothing. That's an awful thought. Isn't that what we do when we sin, though? Don't we sell ourselves for nothing? What are you going to get out of it? Really nothing. We talk about the heaven's going to pass away, the earth's going to pass away, everything's getting eaten like a worm and like by a moth. None of those things are worth it. You are selling yourself for nothing. However, the promise is that yet you shall be redeemed without money. Without money, but with the blood of Jesus Christ. That's how he's going to pay for you. Even though you sold yourself, and maybe you feel like you don't feel this worth, because I sold myself for nothing. I didn't get anything out of it. Yet he's going to redeem me with something that's even more precious than money. And what that shows you is that shows you how valuable you are. That shows you how much God values you. That he's going to do all these things. He's going to redeem you. He's going to part the Red Sea. He's going to give you his own son just to say, you are my people. He is the God of all comfort. And he is able to do this through redeeming us with something as precious as the blood of Jesus Christ. If you are not a Christian, there's always two ways I always feel like people take it. And there's one way that if you're trying to convince someone to become a Christian, you can have almost this really authoritative, go get it kind of attitude. And I think this is what actually worked the best on me, was that, hey, look, this is the situation. This is the penalty for not obeying the gospel. This is what he's promising you. It should be an obvious conclusion. Go follow Jesus. Allow him to go save you. And sometimes that works for people. Then there's other times when there's the plea. And it's the pleas that God used at the end of this chapter. And he says, please, let me take the cup. Please listen to me. I want to save you. I want to take this cup away from you. I just need you to let me do it. What's amazing about this is in chapter 51 here, he does both. He does absolutely both. Whatever you need to hear from God so that you can obey the gospel, either of those situations, he provides both. Yes, he has the penalty. Yes, he has the strong arm, but he also has the same loving arm. He has the same plea. It would make him happy tonight if you obeyed the gospel. Nothing would make his day greater than something like that. If you are ready to obey the gospel and you're ready to allow the Lord, the arm of the Lord to save you tonight, please come forward as we stand and as we sing.